everyone. We're glad to be back today in the recording studio for a new episode of our podcast, What the Field, where we talk to experts about all things food, farming, and system change, and lots of other topics that we love. Today, though, we'll be talking specifically about nutrition and the impact that soil health and different agricultural practices can have on the quality of our food and on our health. So we're joined today by Raiza Rezende, who, amongst lots of other things, is co-founder of RHEA, which is the Regenerative Healthcare European Association. So thank you so much for joining us today, Raiza. How are you?
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. I'm good. And you?
We're doing very good as well. So, perfect. Maybe to kick things off, you can tell us a little bit about yourself and just do like a brief introduction so that everybody kind of knows your background and how you'll get into the world of like regenerative agriculture and healthcare and all of that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so my background to start with, like I'm Brazilian. I've been living in Europe for the last 9 years of my life. But I come from Rio, and this is where I started studying chemical engineer. So that's really my background. And, in Brazil, we have a very big petroleum and gas industry. So chemical engineering was very much towards that. And at some point that stopped making sense for me. I was always, even though I was living in Rio with like 9 million people, I was always someone with an environmental, awareness that was quite big. And when I finished university, I tried to do many things different and try different courses and different activities. And one of them was a syntropic agriculture course. I don't know if you guys ever interviewed anybody on this space, but it's quite big in Brazil. It's coming from a Swiss guy called Ernst Gotch. And he's very big in Brazil, and a lot of that agroforestry movement in Brazil, it's streaming from syntropic. And that was really like life-changing for me. It was really when I understood like the flaws of our food systems, how our food is produced, and how I actually could make an impact with my work and with my activities as a human being. So that took me on a big quest. I did several courses with Felipe and Diana and also Ernst himself. And it took me to Europe. At the time I was like 22, so I was very young and wanting to work in different things. I went woofing all around Europe. So that allowed me to work with a variety of agricultural systems like syntropic, permaculture, market gardening, holistic grazing, or like holistic management and rotational grazing. And more recently, we're specifically working with more intensive tree crop systems. So around these years, I've been traveling and living in different countries in Europe, working in different farms and with different organizations as well. And in between that, I was also someone with a very high consciousness, awareness around health and my own health. I was always someone that was taking care of my own health very strongly. And at some point it connected in my mind as like, okay, we're working with the soil, we're working with agriculture, and I'm taking care of myself, but I also want this to be taken to other people and work more in the public health kind of space. So it took me to do a nutrition course. So I'm a registered nutritionist as well. In the meantime, it led me to co-found RHEA as well, with my friends.
And what does RHEA do at the moment, Raiza?
Yeah, so RHEA, we really started as a movement. When I met Susanna, my co-founder, on LinkedIn, we connected and we're like, okay, we're both nutritionists and we're working with regenerative agriculture. So like, let's get together and do something. First of all, we realized that the data and the information was very little in the space. So we're talking about 3 years ago. Now we see there's a big evolution of people connecting soil health to human health, but especially like 3-5 years ago, it was very little. So we're definitely part of this build up and definitely part of this movement growing, especially in Europe. So we launched as a movement, four of us. We're four female co-founders, so a female organization. Me, Susanna, Irini, and Christina. And we're all dietitians or nutritionists working with agroecology, regenerative agriculture, and etc. We noticed at first the information was not there, so we wanted to first inform ourselves and read the data, go through the papers and etc., but also to generate this information, this knowledge to go to other people. So we started creating a lot of different types of content, sharing online through social media, and it spread like wildfire. It was like people really wanted to hear that. People were were striving for this kind of information. I was like, okay, yeah, actually, the planetary problem, which is something so big that doesn't even fit my mind, actually can go much deeper into something that touches upon me, which is my own health. And so we started getting a lot of attention, and we realized, okay, we need to go to the next level, which is we need to register as an organization. So we registered in Portugal. We are registered as a nonprofit organization. And we started working with different types of funding streams. So we're now working mostly with European funding. And we have different areas of work. So one pillar is education. And awareness, creating information, data, advocacy as well. So we create content. We have launched the One Health Manifesto in the past. We are doing webinars. We're doing all sorts of also in-person events and workshops and things like that. We also have a very specific research pillar. So we have one research project happening on the ground in Portugal, which is testing nutrient density with olives and almonds. And we also have, which I can go more in depth, let's talk more about it. And we also have like a very strong advocacy policy pillar. And we are now really looking forward to push something that we developed, which is called the Agri-Health Nexus. So connecting agriculture and health, because we see that right now in the European Union, we see that this is very much separated into two silos, agriculture and health. So we want to address to the European Commission specifically about this connection. So we have these three main pillars of work at the moment.
And all of the awareness that you do in RHEA, Raiza, who is kind of your audience? Is it for farmers? Is it for consumers, for experts, for nutritionists? Who is it for?
Yeah, so we started very much directly to health professionals.
Okay.
So that was our focus. And this is also why we're calling ourselves regenerative healthcare, right? We're working with health, and we want to bring this knowledge to the healthcare sector, right? We want to connect agriculture to the healthcare sector. However, like organically, we have a very multidisciplinary audience. We have farmers, we have nutritionists, we have policy makers, we have researchers, we have just people, organizations. Actually, whenever we do workshops or events, we see that it's a very multi-crowd. But it's like technically saying, I would say that our focus is mostly towards connecting healthcare sector. So doctors, nutritionists, hospitals, and healthcare organizations to agriculture.
Super. And how do these health professionals receive your information?
Yeah, there's a mix, for sure. So I think there's already quite a lot of health professionals, especially the nutrition side, which are much more connected to food. They have a bit more awareness. And at some point also, I feel like when you're working with healthcare, you're doing medicine, you're working with this very traditional institutions, a very traditional way of functioning. If you are a bit more aware of how things work, at some point you stop questioning, right? If you're a medical student, you're in university for 9-10 years and you're only studying about drugs, right? You're not really studying about how food impacts your body. You actually literally have maybe 30 hours in 10 years about nutrition. And some people don't question it, of course, but the ones that are capable of trying to understand a little bit more holistically the body, I think this questioning starts to come. So we actually have quite a good feedback and quite good engagement from the healthcare sector. However, of course, it's a build up, right? We need to kind of like walk a little bit step by step to change, especially because when we're talking about healthcare sector, hospital, medical organizations, these are institutions that are working with the mentality for so many years. And it takes a while to change, and also takes these pioneer teachers or professors, researchers inside of these institutions to actually bring change as well. So we're trying to address this, to go through these little pinpoints, find the specific people inside these organizations to actually make a bigger impact. But in general, I'd say that the community is very much interested, and it makes sense for them when they hear and when they understand the connection of foods and your body and your gut microbiome. This is all interconnected with the soil and soil microbiome. We start making big connections here, and people start understanding things a bit deeper.
But there's like two main messages that I'm hearing, right? Because I guess if they are mostly taught to prescribe drugs, you have to first say that food is help them to see food as medicine, right? And then another step that it's that food should be sourced from specific sources, right? So this a two-step conversion, right?
Yes, for sure. And the second one is harder. So, and the two are necessary. And I also like to be very nuanced when we're talking about this. Of course, as RHEA and as a person, as an individual, we're always striving for regenerative, organic, local, seasonal. These are all things and concepts that we're working, pushing, for sure. But let's remember that we're coming from a health status as society, that we are just drowning in processed food, right? We are in a massive health disease states, not health, but disease states as a society as a whole. So you have, like, in Europe, 90% of all deaths in Europe are caused by the non-communicable diseases, the NCDs, which are like heart disease, cancer, like diabetes. All of these are diseases that are caused by lifestyle, right? So we have an initial state where people are uneducated, unaware about how is food connected to your health in the first place. So some people just need to eat some fruits and vegetables. It doesn't really matter where they're coming from, but they're just needing to integrate these elements into their diet, right? And then next step, after we create a good foundation of, okay, let's eat more whole foods and less processed foods. Okay, now let's see where we're sourcing this food from, because it's a step, as a nutritionist, when you're providing a clinical guidance to someone, you don't just start with like a lot of information. You need to start slow. But you're correct. There's two messages here. One is, let's eat healthier. And the second one is, okay, apart from eating healthier, let's source better this food, and let's have food that have more nutrients, that are supporting agricultural systems, that are regenerating soil and communities.
On the science side of all of this, I feel that, like, for the first message, there's a lot of data and a lot of science that's kind of been built for a long time, right? That shows that eating fruit and vegetables is obviously like good for your health. So there's kind of like no doubt on the science, because it's been proven, right, time and time again. But for the second one, since it's more new and it's a little bit more complex, maybe, how do you guys approach the science side, and where you also like get the data from? Do you think the second one is harder because the science is more new, or is there enough science even behind the second statement to kind of bring it to the professionals that you guys are working with?
Yeah. Definitely it's a very new field, right? Nutrient density is a word it's coming in the last 5 years, let's say, mostly with the work of Dan Kittredge and the Bio-Nutrient Food Association. And in terms of science, yes, we also have very little science. We are in a stage where we're now having more interest to build up this science. So what we did in RHEA when we started was like, okay, because we receive this question a lot. So people are like, where is the science? So what we did, and you can find it in our website, it's live and it's open source. We have a big database on our website that we just gather a lot of different resources and data around nutrient density and regenerative agriculture, food systems, etc. And it's all there. So we have it, but yes, we need more for sure. And that makes it harder, of course. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that, science is not always clear. So what we're aiming here as a theory is regenerative agriculture generates more nutrient dense foods, right? We have data to prove that, but we also have data that don't prove that. Okay, so we have a bit of a mix. Let's be nuanced, because I like to be nuanced and science needs to be nuanced. What are we calling regenerative here? Well, you guys are also working with different farmers, different systems. We know that regenerative is not straightforward, right? We have periods of transition, for example, of adaptation. We also have a period that to ignite, to start some soil processes, it takes a while, right? So you start with the first practices in the first years, and sometimes maybe you're not getting the results when you test it, when you go to the lab and test it. And that's okay. This is part of a regenerative transition. That's why when we're talking about regenerative and certifications, etc., we're going much more to an outcome-based a process, because we're testing, but we need to have the outcome. Are we calling ourselves regenerative, but is it really impacting the soil? And this is what I think, that it's impacting the nutrient density data. What do we have in terms of data? And this is coming a lot from the BFA, but also from David Montgomery and NBK and NBCO. They have a lot of papers. It's all on our database. You can check it out. They have when they're testing regenerative farmers, especially in the Montgomery studies, they go for minimum 5-year regenerative farmers. What does that allow us? It allows us to have a system that it's already in place for at least 5 years, and it already has some kind of biological processes happening in order for us to have the outcomes that we want to see. Okay. If we go to regenerative farmers that just started their journey, let's say, and they're not in the process of actually regenerating, we might test the difference in nutritional profile, and we might not get this result that we want. So when we're talking about here that regenerative agriculture, organic agriculture, agroecology is generating higher nutrition in crops, let's talk about farmers that are doing it for a while. Okay, so we have the soil health that we need in order to translate into crop quality. But coming back to the data, what is more important here that we see across all of the studies? What is the key indicator that is telling us, okay, we can talk about nutrient density? It's soil health. If we do not have soil microbiological activity happening, and that's specifically coming from the BFA, the parameter that they looked upon is soil life activity. It's what generates more nutrient density. So let's come to these farmers to actually work on the soil properly. Because when we're talking about regenerative, we're like, okay, I do cover crops. Great. How is your cover crop? How often do you plant it? How many cover crops do you have per year? What are the species that you're planting? What is the density of planting? What is your timeline for planting? so many things. Does the cover crop actually work or not? So when you work with all of these techniques, you need to make sure that they're actually being applied with excellence, so we can actually see an outcome on that.
Super aligned on that, Raisa. I think for us that we work with many organic farmers, and that many times we stopped ourselves from talking about nutrient density or health regarding organic, because it's true that organic, it's about a lot of practices, and we believe them to be better for the environment and better for many things, but you cannot actually prove that those practices are having a direct impact, right? But now with Regenerative, what we do is the farmers that we consider regenerative, we do tests in their soil, in their biodiversity, in their water cycles. So we say, okay, they have proven these outcomes, and then how do we relate these outcomes to the bigger picture? So be it biodiversity, nutrient health, etc. So super aligned on that. And I would love for you to explain like what has happened to our soils and what has been the impact in or health or nutrition, and is it connected to the amount of supplements that people are taking nowadays? And what's the correct way to talk about this? Is it that regenerative agriculture or soil health actually has an impact on people's health, or like what's the correct, or is it about nutrients and that's it? What's the correct way to talk about it? Yeah.
I think there's various ways to talk about it. It's actually a little box that you open and you just have so many pathways to go through. So, correlating to the previous question, like when we're talking about nutrient density data and how new this is and how very little data we have, on the opposite side, we actually have quite a lot of data of the nutrient loss across the years, across the decades. That's being actually very well documented. So we know that the crops that we farm today are very different from the crops that were farmed back in the days when agriculture started. Not only the practices, the machinery, the chemical inputs, but also the varieties, the seeds, and all of that. So throughout the decades and the centuries, we have lost quite significantly the amount of nutrients in our crops. That's really well documented, okay? And it's not just because the Green Revolution and because we started degrading soil. I think we have quite a big understanding that agriculture started going bad after the Green Revolution. We, as humans in agriculture, we always had some kind of disbalance with the land. There are very few indigenous communities around the planet that actually had a very well balanced way of living with the land and farming the land. But for many cultures, that was not the case. So like the Romans, for example, they were big ones that destroyed quite a lot of land. This is very well documented. Let me see if I have the book here. It's called Dirt. It's also from Montgomery. And he goes through all of the civilizations throughout history that have rise and fall, and they are correlated with the degradation of the land, because these civilizations, they need soil to produce all of the things that they need in order to thrive, no? And if soil is degraded, then the civilizations tend to fall as well. So we have a history as humans of learning how to deal with soil. So definitely there's a disconnection here. I find that this is the biggest thing that actually made us sick nowadays, is a very big disconnection with the land mentality, which is, I'm going to extract and I'm going to take as much as I can from this land. I'm going to chop down the forest. I'm going to put fire. I'm going to, just extract and hoping that nature is just going to recover. But actually we see that this disconnection is just taking us to an extractive mentality that we follow until nowadays. And of course that was worsened by the green revolution when all the chemicals came about. So what was the initial question? I got
Yeah, that was perfect. And then the second question was like, what's the correct way to talk about it? Is it like if you have soil health, you then can prove that the products you're producing are healthier, or just have more nutrients and doesn't mean healthier? What's the correct way?
Yeah. And so I think it's different messages for different targets, right? So if you're a farmer, and I think this podcast is addressing a lot of farmers, I think that must be listening to this. I think I would start with your seeds. So your soil and your seeds, where you're getting your seeds from, and especially like how can you reproduce the seeds that are in your land and treated by you and treated by your personnel or yourself, to propagate it over the years and have a seed that it's going to have more nutrition inside. So the seed is a very, very important starting point that we often forget. It's the variety of the food. It's actually, when we're doing the research in nutrient density, we are ideally separating per cultivar because it varies a lot across cultivars. If we're talking about healthcare professionals or maybe industry players that are looking to spread this message, I would say that first of all, do the research. We cannot have claims without having on the ground research. So if you're working with farmers, if you're working with cooperatives, if you're working in the chain, let's work with these farmers to test their crops. Okay, so throughout the years, what is the outcomes? And this is where I'm focusing a lot on my work here in Portugal or in general in Europe, is like, how can we include nutrient density as a key parameter that we track in MRVs, So we're tracking soil health, water health, biodiversity, but we're not tracking nutritional or crop quality, but nutritional profiles. So it's important, even if we don't have the results that we don't want, that's okay, because it's good to have the data, It's important for us to separate ourselves from the results that we want. Yes, I want my crops to be more nutritious, but let me take this bias off here, and I'm going to test it. And even if I don't have the results that I want, I'm going to follow it over the years, and I will see, maybe in 5 years, I will have the result that I want. And that's also accompanied by what Dan is talking a lot about, which is the defining nutrient density, which I think it gets lost a little bit in messages. So I'm going to explain what does it mean. I'm a farmer. I'm farming tomatoes. I want to test nutrient density on my tomatoes. I go to the lab. I test a few parameters, nutritional parameters, like vitamin C or lycopenes, for example, and I have the results. So then I have these results, and what do I compare it with? I compare it to my neighbor. I compare it to who? How do I know that these results are high or medium or low? Okay. So then we enter what we're talking about with Dan, which is defining nutrient density. Okay. So to define nutrient density, what do we need to do? We need to, let's gather samples from this same tomato, the same cultivar, but across different farms, across different farming methods, regions, and etc. So we have a spectrum of results, and then we can have, where is my result within this spectrum? Okay, now I have a database so I can benchmark, I can have comparison between the other results. So, I see my sample now is here, it's in the middle. Okay, so I'm in average medium nutritional profiles for my tomato. Okay, so now I have a starting point. Now that I know that in the next years, as I measure it again, I can see if it's increasing or decreasing, where I am in this spectrum again. What's the difficulty with defining nutrient density is that, you need to sample a lot of samples, and you need to do it for every crop. And it's logistically, let's say, and financially it's a big mess. It's very hard. Okay. So this is the mission of the BFA. This is why we started working with the BFA here in Europe also, because we are dedicating our nutrient density research for almonds and olives to do exactly this process. So what are we doing with the Aboinova research project, which is our nutrient density research project here? We're working with almonds and olives in intensive systems, which normally are systems that are being farmed intensively with cultivars that have been modified throughout time to be planted in a certain way, to take a certain amount of inputs and to produce in a certain rate, to be adapted to machinery and etc. And we're entering the systems and say, okay, these systems already exist at large scale in Spain and Portugal. They're being applied like aggressively throughout lots of hectares of land. And either we create a whole new system, which is actually not going to be adopted, or we work with the system that it's already in place to improve it. So this is the premise of the Aboinova project, that we can, within these intensive systems, we can farm better. We can adopt regenerative practices within it. And one of the parameters that we're researching is nutrient density, and we as RHEA are responsible for the nutrient density research. So what are we doing? We have trials on farms, on operating real farm contexts. So these are large-scale farms that we're separating areas where we are running trials. So in the trial area, we have a control plot, which is running business as usual. So running as a conventional, with the conventional practices and not changing. And we have the trial plots, which we are applying regenerative practices. And within this trial, the regenerative practices, we have a lot of different tests. So we're testing different cover crops, we're testing different amendments and biostimulants and organic fertilizers and different things. And we're seeing how that affects soil, plants, biodiversity, water, and nutrient density. So apart from the on-farm trials, where we're specifically trying different techniques, we're also doing the broad sampling. So we're now going to sample from different farms across Portugal with the same cultivars, with the same systems to minimize the variance. But we're keeping the same cultivar and the same system, but we're sampling from different farmers. We don't have a number yet of how many samples you want to have. That's also depending on budgets. So we are going as we can. But the more samples that we have, the better, right? So we have a bigger spectrum. And we're starting the sampling this year of like this broad sampling. We have almond harvest in August and we have olive harvest in October. So this is the first year that we're actually sampling from other farmers. And then we're going to have like maybe 2-3 years of broad sampling to combine with the on-the-farm trials to understand, okay, this is the spectrum that we have, and this is where our samples are in this spectrum. And we can then see, okay, are we actually improving nutrient density or not?
So when you were saying, why are we not including kind of this nutrient density part on MRVs? I guess because it seems super complex and super expensive, right?
Yes, it is. But we need to start somewhere. And sometimes it's just about, if the crop is already being sent to the lab, it's just about adding a few tests more, you know? So within an MRV solution, which we are already taking a budget to test these crops and the soil, it might be not so much more expensive, you know? So it's good to have the data, as I said, even if we're not yet have the MRV framework for nutrient density, it's good that we start developing it. So this is also one of the things that the Aboinova is providing now. At the end, we want to come up with a methodology of practices that are working on the ground and that we're measuring. So we're working with 3 different universities here in Portugal. They are taking care of the scientific part, and we have plus more than 10 agronomic international organizations working with us, including my company, which is called Agrosystemic, including David Dahl, which is the almond expert. We included soil capital farming, so many interesting people that are working with us, that we can, at the end of the study, say, okay, we tested these practices. These are the ones that works. These are the ones that we actually see a direct correlation. So we can create a methodology, and this is how you track it. These are the tests this is the methodology for testing that financially it works. So of course, we're not testing all the nutrients because that's financially not viable. But we have a methodology for testing that works, that that it can be adapted by the industry, and that we can include within these MRV frameworks as well.
That's super interesting. Like, we would be super willing to introduce part of this measurement if you gave us guidance. Like, this is the things that you need to request from a lab, and then, like, I guess many more people would be willing to support like the database that you have, and that getting, like, at some point maybe we can, with all of that data, we can get a response like, okay, from the data you gave me, this is how you're compared to others, things like that, because you could become kind of, a data bank of all of these sources, right?
Exactly. And in Europe, it's very interesting because we have European funding that allow us to do that, to focus on research. So one of the things that we want to do for next year, 2026, and that goes hand in hand with our policy work and with the agri-health push, is that we want to tell the European Commission, say, hey guys, by the way, we noticed that you don't have any soil and health connected in your calls, which are each Horizon call is like 5 to 6 million. So we want to push you to create a joint call for Agri and Sante, which are the nomenclature that the European Commission uses. And we want to test nutrient density. We want to test nutrient density at scale. We want to test especially for like the big commodity crops, which are the crops that people are eating, mostly like corn, wheat, like grains, legumes, apples, so many crops that we can already start at the European level with European money to fund these databases, to fund this research and this data collection. So then, yes, of course, then it's easier for companies, for cooperatives, for other people to integrate this database and this methodology. But it's hard for a farmer, or it's hard for one company to actually say, okay, I'm going to do the research, because yes, it's expensive. It's complex. There's a lot of like cost for logistics. There's a lot of like science that needs to be done, that if you're just a normal person interested in nutrient density, it's like completely overwhelming. And even for me, that's when I started this, I was like, yeah, let's do it. We're going to do it. We're going to test nutrient density, and suddenly it's like a hole that the more you dig, the more there is. And I'm like, going inside the hole, and it's like, okay, there's a lot to be addressed here, and we need to do it in conjunction. This is why Horizon Europe will be so relevant for us as RHEA, but for so many other organizations that are already willing to research nutrient densities, because we have the funding, we have consortiums that are multi-country, we have universities, we have all of the research, the scientific coordination that we need, and therefore we can advance nutrient density research at scale at a European level.
Yeah, super interesting. And is there, because I'm time conscious and I can see that we don't have so much time left, is there like any piece of data that you always use to kind of like get people hooked, or to kind of explain the importance of what we're talking about now? Because we've talked about a lot of different topics, but like intangible data, what's some of the stuff that you usually use to convince people that this matters?
There's a few, and I can share the links as well that you can put in the comments. And as I said, in our database, we have quite a lot of resources. There's one paper that I really love. It's published in Nature. It's called Soil Health and Microbiomes. One Health. I have to look it up, the title. But it brings the concept of One Health, which is one concept that we didn't talk about it here, and I think it's important to also mention. So the concept of One Health states that the health of soil, plants, animals, and humans is completely interconnected and interdependent. So basically, we are dependent upon each other, right? We're not separated as humans. We depend on soil, we depend on plants, and we depend on animals. And this paper, why is it so interesting? It's because it analyzes with the One Health concept through the microbiome perspective. So they go and they test microbiomes in plants, in animals, in humans, in different like ecosystems. And they realize that even though the families have, or the concentration of certain families is different, we do share amongst all of us, all of these ecosystems, the same families of microbes. Okay, so it means that we are very much connected through this microbiological cycle. And why is this important, especially when we're talking about human health and gut microbiome, which is so hyped at the moment? We all wanted to have gut health and drinking our healthy kombuchas and fermented this and fermented that. That's great. But why is that important, right? Because we are very much connected to the broader microbiological activity and landscape. So this is a very important paper because it not only brings us to the table, say we are here connected, but it brings a very specific parameter that we can measure, which is microbiological activity, which is what I linked at the start. That is the key parameter for soil health. It's soil life activity. We're always coming back to microbes. So for me, it's very inspiring that we can actually say that soil has the same microbes as me. So I'm like, okay, so how do I enhance my gut microbiome? Or how do I enhance soil microbiome so that we as an ecosystem, we're healthier, right? So I think this paper is very interesting. The other one that I would mention, and there's quite a few from Montgomery, but it tested regenerative versus conventional for nutrient density. And it's this paper that I also mentioned, is that they're taking farmers that have minimum 5 years old, so 5 to 10 years regenerative systems, and testing nutrient density on these systems. And there you really have like positive outcomes in terms of enhanced nutritional profiles. So I think these are two big ones that say, okay, science is here. We can look at this and we can scale these studies.
Wow, that's great. A lot of reading to do for us.
Yeah, a lot of reading, but this is also our work in terms of like, not everybody's going to sit down to read these resources, to read this data, right? So how can we translate data into communication and language that people get more hooked and get more involved? And this is also one of the parts of the Abuenova project that I didn't mention. And we are applying now for the EIT funding for this, to increment the fund that we already have, but to have more funding for the nutrient density research. And one of our partners is Reading University, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with. And they have a big part of the university, which is around consumer behavior, right? So we're going to test the olive oil and the almonds from our trials compared to conventional produce, and test with consumers that, okay, does it taste better? Is the message on the package does it matter for you? If you read something like more nutritious or healthier, or something, a message that can be tested that actually attracts people to say, I'm going to consume that, because we know that planetary health is something that people care, but they're not really willing to spend more money around products that are working for planetary health. It's still very distant. But when we're talking about human health, there is something that hooks people, So it's like, okay, maybe if in my almonds we had higher levels of vitamin B6, for example, and we can say something in the package is saying more vitamin B6, is it something that actually works for consumers? And so this is also something that we're going to test. We don't know. One organization that it's working a lot with consumer behavior research and companies and brands that are working with nutrient density is the Nutrient Density Alliance in the US. And they have a lot of resources as well in their website for brands. And this is specifically for brands. And for us as RHEA, we're not really working with brands. So it's not our scope. But I really recommend if people are more interested in connecting brands and nutrient density to check out their work, and they have a lot of resources there.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely look into that. I can see that we've run out of time, which is a shame because there were still a few things that I wanted to talk about with you, but maybe we can have other opportunities in the future to continue this discussion. But for now, thank you so much for your time and for this great conversation.
Thank you, Raiza.
Thank you. It's so important that we sit down to actually talk about it. So I'm happy I was here, and I'm happy that I can contribute a little bit to the discussion.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.